So, in the last lecture, I was just ending on the significance of the Six-Day War. Um, again, Israel greatly expanded its territories. The Arabs were more humiliated than ever. Egypt lost the Sinai Peninsula plus the Gaza Strip. Jordan loses the West Bank. Um, Israel gains also, uh, the other part of Jerusalem. You have Golan Heights from Syria, and it really discredits Nasser also, because Egypt really um, fails to be able to do anything. Um, so Nasser basically buries his head in the sand after this, and the momentum that he was able to produce dwindles. And when he dies, Soviet advisors that were there, and so by the way, he had what he called Arab socialism. So he was kind of like in the non-aligned camp where he worked with the Soviet Union quite closely, but he persecuted communists in Egypt and simultaneously supported communists in Yemen um, to fight royalists who were supported by Saudi Arabia. That's all complicated. Needless to say, when we study politics and history, we really have to just break away from labels and our day-to-day logic and look at the way that governments try to balance out what they think is in their best interests, even if it completely breaks with all their ideology. Anyhow, so he dies, the Soviet advisors are expelled, and um, the leader that's after him takes on a joint operation with Syria to get revenge on Israel in 1973, October 6th. They do a surprise attack on Yom Kippur. It's called the Yom Kippur War for Israel. It's called the Ramadan War for Egypt. Uh, Israel wins only after major aid from the U.S., but it's a real shock to Israel. The Arabs also have an oil embargo on top of it. And so um, this time, with Anwar Sadat in power, and with this war, uh, Israel is still in a compromised position. It wasn't in the other wars. So Carter gets involved in this, and we have the Egyptian peace with Israel at Camp David Accords. This is very controversial in the Arab world, seen as a wonderful moment in the world of liberals and conservatives alike in terms of like some sort of progress. Um, what happens? So in 1978, Anwar Sadat makes peace with Israel. And what does, so he officially says, here's this government. Arab governments are supposed to be all wanting to see the end of Israel, destruction of Israel, and Palestine created. And he says, oh, we'll make peace. We'll acknowledge Israel. Egypt then in turn gets back the Sinai. But Egypt will give up Gaza, control of Gaza, which is now the sliver of Palestine left that now is under military occupation uh, by Israel. And again, Egypt will acknowledge the existence of Israel, though. Anwar Sadat is seen as a traitor for this act by many Arabs. He still is. You would not argue that Anwar Sadat is a very popular man in the Arab world. Excuse me, he's right here. Um, but he becomes very popular with people outside of that, saying, "Oh, he was a man who made peace with Israel. Henceforth, he's very noble, one of the few." And then he gets assassinated by army officers for doing this noble act. By the way, the prime minister of the time was Menachem Begin. Anybody remember him? He was that guy who blew up the King David Hotel. So he was a prime minister of Israel. They all win the Nobel Peace Prizes, and yeah, so that's where we were at there. Um, so I'm going to move on now to Iran. So again, like the post-colonial Africa, we have to kind of just move on. I'd like to focus more, not be so abrupt in my transitions, but um, we're giving you little ideas about some of the things going on. Actually, let me go back here though real quick. I just want to make a point. To this day, okay, Israel is the #1 military aid recipient of the U.S. government. To this day. Okay, 2013. Egypt is the second largest military aid recipient of the U.S. government to this day. And it's because Egypt gets their large military aid coming from the U.S. based on them committing to making peace with Israel. Okay? So keep that in mind, especially when I go to cover modern events in Egypt. All right, moving back to Iran. So Iran, or Iran, right, the land of Aryans, um, they had a democracy there. There was a prime minister named Mossadegh. He was overthrown in the 1953 coup around the same time as we helped overthrow democracy in Guatemala. So Eisenhower, um, definitely one of his legacies of his presidency was the using of coups, overthrowing democracies for the sake of U.S. interests. Um, so Iran has a prime minister, a democracy, a parliamentary system. It gets toppled, and the Shah, meaning like the king, becomes absolute monarch of Iran. And Savak is put together, which is a secret police with the aid of the CIA and Mossad of Israel. He promotes secularism. Um, he drinks wine on TV, offending a lot of his Muslim followers. But he's not a religious Muslim. He really kind of wants to emulate Ataturk of Turkey, a modernizer, pro-Western, but also invoking the past Persian, uh, um, monarchies, Persia as opposed to Islamic Shia Islam. And you can look at, he was very opulent. He was pro-Western, as I said, and pro-Israel also, okay? And this was going to create a lot of controversy within Iran itself as to the legitimacy of his monarchy. And I'll stop there and we'll move on to the next section.